Hello, class. We're going to go over Chapter 18, the urinary system. Objectives are to describe the location and structure of the kidneys and explain how they function as vital organs in maintaining homeostasis. Identify the parts of a nephron and describe the role of each component plays in the balancing of blood and the formation of urine. Explain the importance of filtration, reabsorption, and secretion in renal physiology. Discuss the mechanisms that control urine volume. Describe the location, structure, and function of the ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. Explain the process of micturition and the control of problems that frequently occur with this process. And explain the purpose and importance of a urinalysis. So let's first talk about the location of the kidneys. The kidneys are located under the back muscles behind the parietal peritoneum just above the baseline. Remember, we call these retroperitoneal. They're just above your waistline. The right kidney is usually a little lower than the left, and both kidneys are protected a bit by the lower posterior part of the rib cage and have a heavy cushion of adipose tissue called the renal fat pad that encases each kidney and helps hold it in place. Now, the internal anatomy of each kidney is composed of the renal cortex, which is the outer layer of the kidney, the renal medulla, which is the inner portion of the kidney, the renal pyramids, which are triangular divisions of the medulla, the renal papilla, which is the narrow innermost end of the pyramid, the renal pelvis, which is a basin-type space that connects the upper end of the ureter, and the calyx, which is a division of the renal pelvis. You must know these. So the kidneys, its retroperitoneal location means that a surgeon can operate on a kidney from behind without cutting through the parietal peritoneum. If the peritoneum has been cut or opened, the potential for the spread of infection throughout the entire abdominal cavity increases, which we've already talked about. Peritonitis is bad, bad, bad. So here's the urinary system from the outside. You can actually see in D where the image, this is what we call a KUB. It's an X-ray that shows the kidneys, the ureters, and the bladder. The internal structure. So again, I've already described kind of the medulla, the ureters, the medullary pyramid, renal pelvis, the cortex, so you can kind of get an idea of what the inside looks like here. So there are microscopic structures in the kidneys, the nephrons. These are microscopic units of the kidneys, and these are so vital for us. There are more than 1 million microscopic units called nephrons that make up each kidney's interior. Consist of renal corpuscles and renal tubules. A renal corpuscle, also called a Bowman capsule or a glomerular capsule, very important, is the the cup-shaped top of a nephron. The glomerulus is a network of blood capillaries tucked into the Bowman capsule. The renal tubule is made of the proximal convoluted tubule, the PCT. This is a very important part, the first segment of the renal tubule, and it connects the glomerular capsule and the nephron loop. Now, the nephron loop is also known as the Henle loop or the loop of Henle. This is an extension of the proximal tubule that consists of a straight descending limb. It is a hairpin term and straight ascending limb. So they're just this little loop in there. Then it goes down into the distal convoluted tubule, the DCT, which is part of the tubule distal to the ascending limb of the nephron loop. That goes down into the collecting duct, which is the straight part of a renal tubule. And this is the location of the nephrons. There's millions of them. So in here, you can see where the glomerulus is. Remember, glomerulus has a lot of blood capillaries and vessels in there. Then here, if you go over on the right side, you'll see the renal capsule. And then you can see this proximal convoluted tubule, the PCT, that goes down into the descending loop of the nephron, down in the nephron loop, goes up. You'll see the distal convoluted tubule that goes down into the collecting duct. And there's so many of these in there. So this is an image of what the renal corpuscle looks like under like a microscope, basically. And in here, we're going to talk more, but you notice the glomerulus in the middle that has the glomerular capsular membrane, the glomerular capsule. You see all the blood flow in here. And then on the outside, on the distal tubules, you'll see these juxtaglomerular JG cells. We're going to talk about the JG cells a lot more in a minute. Goes down into the proximal tubule. So again, this is a microscopic view of what the glomerulus looks like. So homeostasis cannot be maintained if the kidneys fail and the condition is not soon corrected. If the kidneys fail, a person has to go on renal dialysis. Now, an overview of kidney function. So the kidneys excrete toxins and nitrogenous waste. If these waste accumulate because of protein breakdown, it will quickly reach toxic levels if not excreted. Waste products are known as urea and pneumonia. Another function of the kidneys is it regulates levels of many chemicals in the blood, such as chloride, sodium, potassium, and bicarbonate. Another kidney function is maintains water balance by selectively retaining or excreting salt and water as required by demand. So wherever salt goes, water goes. And another word for salt is sodium. The kidneys also help regulate blood volume and blood pressure via secretion of renin. This occurs in the cells of the juxtaglomerular apparatus, the JG apparatus made of the JG cells. And finally, the kidneys secrete erythropoietin, known as EPO. This hormone is released into the bloodstream during hypoxia. It goes to the bone marrow and stimulates it to produce more erythrocytes, or red blood cells. Now, formation of urine occurs by a series of 3 processes that take place in successive parts of the nephron. Filtration. This goes on continually in the renal corpuscles. Glomerular blood pressure causes water and dissolved substances to filter out of the glomeruli into the Bowman capsule. Normal glomerular filtration rate is 125 milliliters per minute, which is about 180 liters or 50 gallons of glomerular filtrate produced daily. Obviously, we don't normally urinate that much because most is reabsorbed. So here's the formation of urine and what it looks like. Remember, it's filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Now, reabsorption. This is the movement of substances out of renal tubules into blood in the peritubular capillaries. This is water, nutrients, and ions that are reabsorbed. Remember, where sodium goes, glucose goes, or vice versa, so they tag along with each other. Sometimes not all the glucose gets reabsorbed into the blood. An example is in diabetes mellitus, abbreviated as DM. If the glucose concentration increases above the renal threshold, the filtrate then contains more glucose than the renal tubules can reabsorb. There are not enough sodium glucose transporters, therefore the excessive glucose will leave the body in the urine. This is called glucosuria. It is a well-known sign of diabetes because glucose should not come out in our urine. Water is reabsorbed by osmosis from the proximal convoluted tubules, the PCTs. So this is where reabsorption actually begins, is in the PCTs. And it continues into the nephron loop, the distal convoluted tubules, and the collecting ducts. Large amounts of water, approximately 120 liters per day, are reabsorbed by osmosis from the PCTs, or the proximal convoluted tubules. Then we have secretion. This is the movement of substances into urine in the distal and collecting tubules from the blood and the peritubular capillaries. We secrete hydrogen ions, potassium, and certain drugs by active transport. Ammonia is secreted by diffusion. Remember, urea and ammonia are waste products in urine. Sometimes we'll use diuretic drugs to stimulate the production of urine to get rid and pull extra fluid off of the body. So how do we control urine volume? Well, we have to go back to hormones again. So first is the antidiuretic hormone, ADH, which is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. This is an example of a hormone that regulates water reabsorption in the renal tubule. Therefore, it decreases the amount of urine by collecting ducts permeable to water. Antidiuretic, so to stop diuresis or urination. Urine, okay? So anti-urine. ADH. Now, aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal cortex. Aldosterone stimulates the tubules to reabsorb sodium at a faster rate, so it actually reduces the urine volume. When the blood volume and blood pressure drop below usual, extremely important here, this is sensed by the JG cells in the JG apparatus. The JG cells, or juxtaglomerular cells, then release an enzyme called renin that initiates the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or the ROS. The ROS eventually produces constriction of the blood vessels, and by doing so, it raises the blood pressure. The ROS also triggers the adrenal gland to secrete aldosterone, which promotes water retention, so we retain water, thus increases the total blood volume and contributes to the rise in blood pressure. Next, we have the atrial natriuretic hormone, the ANH, and this comes from the heart's atrial wall. Stimulates the kidney tubules to secrete more sodium, thus lose more water, which is the opposite of what aldosterone does. The ANH stimulates the renal tubules to secrete more sodium, thus losing more water. And ANH is a salt and water losing hormone, thus it increases urine volume. Now, atypical urine volume. So these are words that are not normal for urine. Anuria, A, without or absence of urine. Oliguria is scanty amount of urine. Polyuria is unusually large amount of urine, and you need to know these terms. Because a change in urine volume or output is a significant indicator of many diseases, measurement of both fluid intake and urine output is necessary. And I and O is what we call this, and we do this all the time in nursing. Now, the normal adult urine output's about 1,500 milliliters per day, or 15 to 1,600 milliliters per day. So how do we eliminate urine from the kidneys? Well, we do this through the ureters. These are narrow, long tubes that are less than a 1/4 inch wide and 10 to 12 inches long, with expanded upper end in the renal pelvis located inside the kidney that's lined with a mucous membrane. It uses peristalsis to help move urine down the ureter to the bladder. The function of the ureters are to drain urine from the renal pelvis to the urinary bladder. Now, there can be episodes of what's called renal colic. This is pain caused by the passage of a kidney stone. They are painful for a couple of reasons, such as tearing or stretching of the urinary lining and the cramping muscles of the ureters. And we talk about this more in the future. This shows a cross-section of a ureter. Again, they're only about a 1/4 inch wide, so they're really narrow. Now, the urinary bladder. The empty bladder lies in the pelvis just behind the pubic symphysis, the pubic bone, and you cannot feel an empty bladder. When full of urine, the bladder will project upward into the lower portion of the abdominal cavity. So oftentimes we'll palpate for the urinary bladder to see if someone is retaining or keeping urine in and not urinating it out. Now, the structure of the urinary bladder is very elastic. It's a very muscular organ, capable of significant expansion. When the bladder is filled, its inner surface may stretch until it's smooth. It is lined with a mucous membrane arranged in little rugae, and as the stomach mucosa is. So it's got little rugae, and then it just stretches and gets smooth. The function of the urinary bladder is storage of urine before voiding, and without it, we would not be able to void. So this shows you the structure and location of the urinary bladder. Again, when it's empty, it's behind the symphysis pubis and you can't feel it, but as it starts to fill up, it goes up and over the symphysis pubis and you can actually feel it. And the males, they have a prostate that goes around. Women do not have a prostate. Then we have the urethra. This is a narrow tube from the urinary bladder to the exterior, where urine passes out of the body through the urinary meatus. The urethra is lined with a mucous membrane, and the opening of the urethra to the exterior again is called the urinary meatus. The functions of the urethra is passage of urine from the bladder to the exterior of the body, and in males, the urethra assists with passage of semen from the body. Now, cystitis is the term that is known as a bladder infection. Another important thing to know is micturition. Micturition means urination and voiding. They all three refer to the passage of urine from the body or emptying of the urinary bladder. Micturition is the passage of urine from the body, also called urination or voiding. There's regulatory sphincters. We have an internal urethral sphincter that's involuntary, and we have the external urethral sphincter, which is voluntary. That's why we can hold our urine for a while. The bladder wall permits storage of urine with little increase in pressure. And micturition is a complex body function. It requires control and integration of both voluntary and involuntary nervous system components. The emptying reflex is initiated by stretch reflex in the bladder wall. The bladder wall will then contract, the internal sphincter relaxes, and then the external sphincter relaxes and urination occurs. The bladder's muscular wall permits this organ to accommodate a considerable volume of urine with very little increase in pressure until a volume of 300 to 400 milliliters is reached. Then at some point, we're going to feel the urge to urinate to get this out. The term urinary retention is retained urine. That means urine is produced, it's in the bladder, but it's not being voided. It's not being urinated out. Urinary suppression means there's no urine produced, but the bladder is normal. Urinary incontinence is also called enuresis, and this is where urine is voided involuntary. This is a common bladder control problem in elderly people and may be caused by a spinal injury or stroke. When it is caused by a spinal injury or stroke, we call it a neurogenic bladder. And retention of urine can cause cystitis, which is an irritation, inflammation of the bladder that becomes an infection quickly. Urinalysis, this is the physical, chemical, and microscopic examination of urine. It can show us a lot of different signs of disease, changes in the normal characteristics of urine, the appearance of abnormal urine characteristics. So urine should be a light pale yellow, should be clear, should not have a horrific odor. It does have a little ammonia odor. We shouldn't be seeing a lot of stuff floating in it. We should not see pink or red or blood in it. And we talk about a urinalysis, also abbreviated as a UA, a lot more in a future class. And that is the end of chapter 18.